Hello, welcome back to my YouTube channel. If you're new here, my name is Katie, I'm a full-time sketchbook artist, and we are going to be doing a sketchbook review today. So this is the sketchbook in question. This is the Hahnemuhle watercolour book. This is cold pressed, it's 200 GSM, it's A5, but they do them in other sizes. So you can get them in portrait and landscape orientation from A6 up to A4, and they also do square options, 14cm squared and 19.5cm squared. But I've got the A5 one here, and all of the watercolour book sketchbooks have got 60 pages, so that's 30 sheets. So it is a little bit smaller than I'm used to because I'm usually working in a Royal Talens, which has a lot more pages and is a lot thicker. But it does mean this is quite lightweight. Now, Hahnemuhle also do a version of this watercolour book, but with 100% cotton paper. This isn't that one, this is just purely cellulose paper. But I think it will be really helpful to see how it handles lots of wet media. Now, I have been using this so far in March, so there is a few sketches in here already. And eventually when this is full, I will do a proper sketchbook tour, but I want to test it out with some other mediums today. So I'm going to talk about how it handles different mediums and show you how it works with pencils and markers and talk about the texture of the paper. I also want to compare how it works against 100% cotton paper. So this is my first watercolour sketchbook, the official watercolour one, because I have used watercolour in other sketchbooks, but they are mixed media. So when I've used my watercolours before, I've used my Clairefontaine mixed media sketchbook, and I've also used my Strathmore 500 series, which is 100% cotton. But I have got the Etchr Perfect sketchbook here that I want to compare it to. Before I get on with showing you the paper and stuff, I do want to just mention the price. So this is around about £15 to £17 that I found online. It's £14.55 on Great Art at the moment. It's on Amazon on the Hahnemuhle storefront for around £17, but I've seen it drop to £15. So I think that's pretty reasonable. I mean, it's not as cheap as some of the sketchbooks I have, but I so far really like it, especially for wet mediums. So this is what the paper looks like inside. You can see the texture is quite light. It's not super rough, which is definitely good for me because I tend to not just use watercolour, I will use mixed media, especially when I'm just using watercolour as my base, I'll still use pencils on top. This is fine-grained watercolour paper on both sides. So with the Clairefontaine, it is smooth on one side and rough on the other, whereas this one is fine grain on both sides. So on the website, it mentions this as medium/cold pressed. I would say it's smoother than you might think of as cold pressed paper, at least for me, from what I've used before. It's pretty durable, it's got this hard cover, and it does open pretty flat, so I'm quite impressed with that. You can keep it closed with this rubber band, which again, really helpful. I do use these quite a lot when I'm working out and about. And it's kind of got this linen effect, so it's not super shiny, it does have a slight sheen to it, but I think that means it will be nice and easy to keep clean, though my sketchbooks generally don't get too dirty. You can see that it is saddle stitched here, and it's obviously not on every page depending on the binding, but so far I haven't found anything to go through the middle, so it's pretty tight, which is great. And I also really like that it does open flat. It's not super flat like the PIS sketchbooks, and I would need to clip it down each side, but for what I need it's pretty good, and I do like that you can open it out fully. Okay, so that's everything about the paper stock, so let's get on with some material tests. I'm going to do this in the back of my sketchbook because, like I said, I have started this already with art in here, and I prefer to do my material tests at the back. You can also see here that there is a little ribbon. I mentioned in my haul that there was a little cutout from this ribbon, but it's just been folded down. I don't tend to use these unless I'm marking halfway, but it's helpful to have that there if you do like it. So we will be using wet media, but first I want to see how it works with dry mediums. So as I mentioned, I am a mixed media artist, so I do find it helpful to see how things lay, especially with pencils and neocolours, to see the texture that they give. So I'm just going to put down some pencil here, and you can see it does pick up the texture, but if I press hard, it's quite a smooth finish. If I press lighter, you can really see the texture there, but again, if I press harder, you can kind of counteract that texture of the page and that grain. I do find I do push quite hard when I do put on my details layer anyway, but you can see here, especially with this darker one, what the paper texture is like. So it's not super rough, but you can see here if you don't press hard enough, it does highlight the texture of the page. So for me that's absolutely fine. I like that I can still get quite smooth lines if I push hard enough. So I'm happy with that, with how it works with coloured pencils. I'm also going to do a little test with Neocolors because that's another medium I tend to use on top of my paintings. So this is just the Neocolor 2, so we'll add some water as well. Again, if I press lighter, you can really see the texture of the paper, but if I press hard, it's still smooth enough and it glides quite nicely on top of the paper. I haven't really got much resistance. Obviously there is a little bit there with the texture, but I find this to be quite a good medium between really smooth paper and really rough. I don't like rough paper, so this feels good to me. I'm also going to put on another colour and then I'll add some water. So although these are dry mediums, Neocolor 2s are water soluble. So I can just add water on here and that really smooths it out so you can't see any of the texture coming through there. And there it is with a bit more water underneath. Before I move on to other wet mediums, I will show you how it works with markers. So I've got some watercolour markers here. So I'm just going to swatch a few different ones. I've got a Tombow here, an Albrecht Dürer and an Ecoline. I don't use alcohol markers in my work, but I do want to see if these come through on the other side. So first the Ecoline. The paper is 200 GSM, so I'm pretty sure it won't, but I will also do some layering tests. So then we've got the Tombow. These are gliding on really smoothly. I find the Albrecht Dürer is a bit wetter. It also gives you a little bit of time, so it doesn't sink in immediately, it's still smudgeable. So it's not super absorbent, which I really like in my sketchbooks. I like to have a little bit of time to be able to smudge. So those swatches haven't come through at all. You can see a little bit of ghosting though, but obviously this is 200 GSM. I expect if it was 300 then you wouldn't see it, but it also means it's a bit less lightweight. So I'm pretty impressed with how this paper can handle things. I do want to see how this works with an extra layer before it starts to pill. So far there's no pill at all, and because it's not super rough, it's not affecting the nibs of my brush pens, which is good because I don't want it to rough those up. So I'm just going on top of this light Tombow with a darker Tombow, and I'm going to really try and layer it on, and I can see it is starting to peel a little bit, so you can see that on the nib of the brush pen there where it's pulling it up. In my Royal Talons I tend to be quite light with my brush pen, so I don't tend to layer it on like this. You can definitely see it is pulling up some of the paper, and you can see the difference in tone there where I've layered it again and again. But it doesn't feel like it's coming through the paper. So you can see there, I can't see at all. This is the one where I have put down the extra layers and it's not showing through. So this paper is doing really well. Obviously I'm getting a bit of the paper texture coming up, but I'm really impressed with how many layers that's taken and it's still not come through the other side. Down here I'm going to use some ink and gouache, and then on the other page we'll do some watercolour blending. So first let's use ink. I've just got a Winsor & Newton Violet ink here. This is watercolour ink and it does go on really smoothly. You can see how it's kind of sinking into the page, but there's still plenty of time. It's not sinking in immediately, which I really like. You can see there where it has started to dry, and I can still pick up on it. So you can see there where it hadn't dried, where I'd put it down quite thickly. But it gives a really nice smooth finish, and we'll test that out again with some watercolour blending as well. And then for the gouache, I'm going to apply it straight onto the page. So quite a lot of gouache there, and I'm just going to blend that out. So you can see if I was using a dry brush, some of the texture that I can get. But I'm using quite a lot of water here and spreading it out nice and evenly. So far I found that the sizing on the pages have been really consistent, which is good for watercolour. And again, you can see some of the texture here from the paper underneath, and the ink is definitely smoother with that. The gouache has picked it up a little bit more. But if I go on top, so if I try and take it away, the paper's doing really well at holding that. And if I grab a tissue and wipe away, yeah, you can really see that you do have that time, especially if you put the water down, to re-wet it to then take it off again. So this paper is really durable, and I'm impressed with how it handles this wet medium. Obviously it is a watercolour book, so you'd hope so. But those are the first tests, so let's test out the watercolour, which is what it's actually made for. So for my watercolour, I'm going to swap to a mop brush because it does hold more water, and I think that will be a good test. I've got my watercolour palette up here, which I will do a video on with my updated colours soon, but I'm also going to make another limited palette for my plein air work. So I'll update you, but so far my watercolour journey is going really, really well. So I'm just going to wet my brush and put down some colour, and then I'm going to blend it into a green. I have done a spread in my sketchbook, which you would have seen in last week's video, which was using this sketchbook. And it did really, really well when I filled the entire page with colour. So I was really, really impressed with that. And I didn't find that it buckled with the amount of water I put down. So here is where you'll be able to see how it blends in with the other colour. So where I've put down that yellow, you can see how it sits on the top. And I have put quite a lot of water there, but you can see where it's starting to blend in. So that's really nice because I don't want it super absorbent. I still want to have that time. And like we saw with the gouache on the other side, you can play around with it again with texture. You can see here where I've put down the colour and it's starting to spread out a little bit. So I haven't done a smooth blend here. So let's see how that looks once it's dried. And down here, I'm going to put down some water and just see how it blooms. So I've put down some water. It's a little bit dirty there from my water pot, but let's put in a blue. And a touch of green apparently, that was on my brush. But let's see how this spreads out. This is a good way of seeing how the watercolour works. And next door to it, I'm going to do that again with a swatch of water. And then I'll put in some blue and some red and see how that works. So a lot of it doesn't spread out massively at the start, but it does slowly spread out. And generally this is how I like to work, in that I will just see and experiment and play with my mediums. And I do find this helpful when you do first get a sketchbook. Obviously I started using it already, but I find this really helpful, so I really recommend. So you can start to see how it's blooming out there, and this will take quite a while to dry because I have put quite a lot of water down. So I really like some of the effects that we're getting there. I also want to do a test with how it works after a few minutes. So let's put down some lavender and we'll let that dry. And then underneath, I'm going to do another swatch, but I'm going to set a timer. So I want to see just how quickly things sink in. So I'm going to set a timer for 30 seconds and then see what happens. So I'm just going to put that down just like above and start my 30-second timer. Okay, so it's been 30 seconds and it's still pretty wet. So you can see this was a completely dry brush and it didn't completely sink in. So that was after 30 seconds. Let's do 60 seconds and see how it goes. Okay, it's been 60 seconds and I can still get some up. Obviously this isn't the most scientific, but it's definitely started to dry a little bit more, and you can certainly see more of the ring there. So I expect with another 30 seconds it would be completely dry, but you can definitely see the difference there. This one's probably been the longest and I can't get it up. So this is a dry brush, and so there's a bit of pigment on there, but that's been this one and this one, so about 1:30, and I can't get it up. So that's really helpful to see just how long things take to dry, but for me that's enough time to be able to play and experiment and still have that smudgeability without it taking forever to dry, which is one of my pet peeves with mixed media, because I'm impatient when I want to create art. I just want to get in there and go through it with my details. So for me, having a shorter drying time is really helpful. Now the next thing I want to do is compare it with the Etchr Perfect sketchbook, which is 100% cotton. So I just want to see the difference, especially with the drying times and the blending. Cotton generally is superior with watercolour and it is highly recommended, but the paper in this is a lot more textured. So I actually won this in a giveaway and I was scared to use it for a long time because it is quite expensive. You can also see here that this Hahnemuhle one is a lot lighter and more white than the Etchr sketchbook. Now this one isn't 100% cotton, so if I was doing a like-for-like comparison, then obviously I would get the 100% cotton version of this. But I really want to show the difference in the texture here. So this one is much more textured, so if I was to put down some coloured pencil If I push really, really hard, it does get rid of some of that texture, but I had to push very, very hard there. And if I was just doing my lines, you can still see the texture showing. So with the same brush, I'm going to do the tests to see how quickly things sink in. So I'll start with my first blob, which we'll leave for the full 1:30. And I'm just going to grab my timer out again, and I'll do this one for 30 seconds and this one for 60. Okay, so this one's had 30 already. Oh, okay, so the left side was definitely wetter than the right side. I can get that up there. And kind of, I've smudged away that initial circle already. And then the 60 seconds. Yes, it's definitely sunk in. I wouldn't say it took that much longer. It's very comparable, actually. And then this one over here, I can see on my timer it's been 1:30. And yeah, I can't get it up at all. So that's very, very similar in the drying times and the absorption. Let's also do a test with the blending. So I'm going to start with the yellow and then move down to the green. Now, as I said, this isn't super duper accurate, but just some initial tests for me to test how well this sketchbook works. Okay, there we go. So you can kind of see the texture there, and already I think this will be a smoother blend than the non-cotton paper. So this one on the left is cellulose and this one is 100% cotton. I can't get any information about this paper, so I'm presuming there's no cotton in the Hahnemuhle watercolor book unless it says it's the 100% cotton. Up here I'll do the water test as well. My water is quite dirty, so it's not super accurate, but we can definitely see how that will spread out. I really love watching this bloom and create these lovely subtle effects, especially over here when you can see that it's dried. Really nice, and the paper's holding really, really well. Obviously I haven't put water all over the page. This one would hold that better because this is 300 GSM, so the paper is quite thick, and this one's 200 GSM, so it still feels nice and thick for putting down water, but this one would hold it better, also because it is 100% cotton. Now you can already see the blending differences here, especially where this one has dried. So I've got that sort of cauliflower blooming. I wasn't aiming for that, and I can already see this one will be smoother. Now perhaps I didn't blend this in very well, but I can see that it has also made the colour quite dull. So I think the 100% watercolour book is better with that. But whilst this one dries, I do want to layer on top. But this one is pretty dry, so whilst this dries, we'll come back to that, and I want to play around with the layering on top of this one. So because I do use coloured pencils on top of my work a lot, I'm going to grab a luminance pencil and just see how it layers on top. So there is a little bit of resistance, especially where it's a little bit, maybe a bit more damp. It's kind of dry. It's still layering on pretty well. Let's use a near colour as well. Yeah, so that's absolutely fine. I can feel that the paper is indenting a bit easier where it was wet. And let's see how it looks on the back. So not too bad. You can see there where we've got that indentation a little bit, but I would certainly still be able to create on this side. I don't mind when you've got sort of texture from behind. I find that when I do use mixed media and I work on the back, it disappears. So don't be too concerned if your paper looks like this. It doesn't show up when you've put something on top. Let's just put on some brush pen as well, just to see how it works. That's layering pretty well. I'm impressed with how the paper doesn't peel immediately. It seems really, really strong and durable. So you can see here at the top we've got the luminance pencil. Definitely a bit less definition here where it's slightly damp. Then we've got the near colour and the Tombow at the bottom. But it's held up really well. Obviously I've covered it now, but you could definitely see the difference in blending there. So let's go back to the Etchr. Okay, so here is the luminance coloured pencil. So you can really see the texture there where it's showing up, and that's just because the paper is rougher, even when I am pressing quite hard. Then we have the near colour. Again, it's just bringing up some of the texture of that paper. And then the Tombow. And that's holding it really well. I'm getting quite a rich colour there, and I'm putting quite a lot of layers on. So it's quite interesting to see, and I'm impressed with how this paper is holding it. I can definitely get a very dark tone. So here are those two watercolour tests. So on the left is the 100% cotton Etchr Perfect Sketchbook, and on the right is the Hahnemuhle not cotton at all paper. I can see the biggest difference, as I said, with the blending here, and also a difference with where I've put it in the water. I didn't do this test over here, but you can see there, obviously it wasn't very scientific, but it spread out a bit more here. And I did find it pretty much the same in terms of the absorption rate for both sketchbooks. So I can definitely see why the 100% cotton sketchbooks are so popular with watercolour artists. I definitely think that it will work better with the blending, but for a cellulose paper 200 GSM, it's held the layers really well. So obviously we have this page and then this page with the drier mediums, and you can be really playful and experimental. I was impressed with how the durability held up when I was wiping away. Now I have done, as I said, a few different things in this sketchbook so far, and I have used a mix of brush pens and also watercolour here. And I definitely plan on using lots of different mediums in here. This is the spread that I shared last week, so I was using a lot more wet media on this page than I have in the other spreads, where I've been a little bit more deliberate and left more white space. I also filmed the process of this one so you can see how much water and watercolour I was using, so I'll pop that on screen now. But I do really like the texture because it's not too much. I really love using colour pencils on top of my work, and so I found this to be a really nice medium in terms of having a paper that works really well with watercolour and using it quite wet in terms of using a lot more water. But it also feels like a good balance with my Neocolours and coloured pencils on top, which is something that I couldn't get from really rough cold pressed paper like in the 100% cotton Etchr sketchbook. So for me, this is a really great balance. I really enjoy using it for mixed media, and I would definitely recommend it. I would 100% buy this again. As I said, this is 60 pages, so there's still a really big chunk in this sketchbook for me to fill, and for the price, I think it is worth it. As I am using more and more watercolour, this feels like a great sketchbook to work in. As you know, I use my Royal Talents quite a lot, but I don't find it's good for watercolour at all. So this is a brilliant sketchbook. I'm really impressed with it, and I'm really glad I bought it. As I continue to fill this sketchbook, I will of course film a sketchbook tour down the line, probably when I hit halfway, but I hope you found this video helpful. Thank you so much for watching. If you have any other specific questions, then do let me know. Otherwise, I look forward to hearing your thoughts, especially if you've used the 100% cotton and whether you recommend that. A big thank you to my patrons for their support in allowing me to create these videos here on YouTube, because I wouldn't be able to do it without them, and thank you for watching. Do hit subscribe if you'd like to see more material reviews and my process, and I will see you next Sunday in my new YouTube video. See you later!